The flashing lights of the fire trucks painted a macabre dance on the faces of my children. Red, blue, strobing across Michael's face, contorted in a mask of pure fury, and Sarah's slick with tears that looked more like oil in the chaotic light. The air, thick with the smell of wet, charred oak and shattered memories, vibrated with their shrieks. "You're insane!" Michael screamed, his voice cracking. He jabbed a finger at me, the nail perfectly manicured, a stark contrast to the soot settling on his expensive suit jacket. "Utterly, certifiably insane! We're having you committed, do you hear me?" Sarah, ever the tragedian, collapsed into a performance of theatrical grief. "Everything, Dad, everything Mom loved, you burned it all!" Her sobs were loud, performative, meant for the audience of firefighters and gawking neighbors. I stood on the damp lawn, the grass cool beneath my worn leather boots, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm. The heart in my chest, which had ached for a year since Eleanor's passing, was no longer a vessel of sorrow. It was a cold, quiet stone. I reached into the deep pockets of my old barn coat, my fingers closing around two small, smooth objects. I pulled them out. Two intricately carved wooden boxes, fashioned from the same cherry wood as our marital bed. I held them out, as an offering. "You fought over my house," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly over the hiss of water cannons striking still glowing embers. "So I gave you all its ashes." The genesis of this bonfire was a party, a week prior, my 75th birthday. The living room I had built with my own hands felt smaller that day, suffocated by the forced cheerfulness and the palpable tension. The great oak beams above, which I had hoisted into place myself, seemed to bear down on us. Eleanor's brother, David, and my sister, Carol, were there, their smiles as strained as mine. They could feel it too, the circling of vultures. Michael, who saw the world as a spreadsheet, couldn't stop himself. He paced the wide plank floors, gesturing to the windows. "The location is prime, Dad. A developer I know would pay 7 figures for the land alone. We could have a contract in a week." "Michael, for heaven's sake, stop," Sarah chided, placing a cloying hand on my arm. Her touch felt like a spider. "He needs care. This house is where I can look after him properly. It's what Mom would have wanted." They talked about me as if I were a troublesome piece of antique furniture they were arguing over. David shot me a look of deep concern, while Carol just stared into her tea, her lips a thin, hard line. I sat in Eleanor's armchair, the one she called her nest, and let their words wash over me. I felt a lifetime of love, of scraped knuckles and sawdust, of shared dreams whispered in the dark, curdling into something I didn't recognize. The moment of transformation, the instant the loving father died and the architect of ruin was born, came when I stepped into the kitchen to refill my sister's glass. They thought I was out of earshot, their voices dropping to the conspiratorial hiss of snakes. "His decline is accelerating, Sarah," Michael muttered. "We need to get power of attorney. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We can have a doctor declare him incompetent before he does something foolish, like leaving the house to a cat charity." And then came the killing blow from the mouth of my little girl, Sarah. Her voice was a venomous confection of sweetness and steel. "Just be patient, Mikey. We play the long game. We just need to wait him out. It won't be long." I stood frozen in the doorway, the glass cold in my hand, the ice cubes clinking softly. It wasn't the greed. I had known about their greed for years. It was the clinical, cold-blooded finality of it. They were waiting for me to expire, not grieving my eventual loss, but anticipating their gain. I walked back into the living room, a thin, brittle smile plastered on my face. I thanked them for the party, accepted their Judas kisses on my cheek, and watched them leave. Their eyes, as they said goodbye, weren't looking at me. They were looking past me, mentally tearing down walls and measuring for new curtains. They never even glanced at the small carved wooden wren sitting on the mantelpiece, a gift I'd made for Eleanor on our 30th anniversary. They didn't know its hollow body now contained a tiny, high-fidelity digital microphone, or that its silent wooden ears had been open the entire time. In the week that followed, I became a phantom in my own home, haunting the rooms Eleanor and I had filled with life. My children's daily calls were a masterclass in feigned concern. "Did you eat today, Dad?" Sarah would ask, her voice oozing sympathy. "Don't forget your blood pressure pills," Michael would remind me, a dutiful son ticking a box. They were building their case, brick by insidious brick, and I, their star witness, gave them all the evidence they needed. On Tuesday, I went to the market and forgot my wallet, fumbling in my pockets with a confused look until a kind stranger paid for my groceries. On Thursday, I had a long, one-sided conversation with Eleanor's prize-winning roses while my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was in her yard. I saw her watch me from the corner of her eye, her face a mask of pity. I was laying a trail of breadcrumbs for my hungry children, leading them down a path of my own design. They saw a mind in decline. They were really witnessing a mind sharpening to a razor's edge. My first real act of rebellion was renting a small, climate-controlled storage unit in a town 30 miles away. The work began at midnight. Over 3 consecutive nights, while the world slept, I carefully moved the soul of the house. I didn't take the valuable antiques or the silver. I took Eleanor. I wrapped her box of handwritten letters tied with a faded silk ribbon in an oilcloth. I gently folded the wedding quilt she had spent a decade stitching, its pattern telling the story of our life together. I took the single photo album from our wedding, its leather cover worn soft by a half-century of loving hands. And finally, I took my tools, the chisels, the planes, the saws that had shaped every beam and board of this house. When I locked the storage unit door for the last time, the house I returned to was just a structure, a beautiful, empty shell. My next stop was the downtown office of William Davies, Esquire. He was not the slick family lawyer Michael used, but a shrewd bulldog of a litigator I'd been referred to by an old friend from my builders' union. "He eats vultures like your son for breakfast," my friend had said. I placed the small wooden wren on his expansive mahogany desk. "They think I'm losing my mind, Bill." He listened to the entire recording without interruption, his expression hardening from professional interest to cold fury. "My own father was put through something similar, Arthur," he said when it was over, his voice a low growl. "These people disgust me. What do you want to do?" "I want to change my insurance policy," I said. This was the linchpin. My homeowner's policy was robust. Michael had made sure of it years ago, seeing it as a safety net for his future asset. But I wasn't interested in the structure's replacement cost. My life's work wasn't in the 2x4s and the drywall. It was in the artistry Eleanor and I had woven into its very bones. The hand-carved mantelpiece depicting the 4 seasons of our life together. The custom cherrywood cabinetry in the kitchen, built without a single right angle, a testament to our belief that life shouldn't be boxed in. The inlaid hardwood floors in the entryway, forming a compass rose pointing north towards the mountains where I had proposed. Mr. Davies understood immediately. He drew up the new policy with a surgeon's precision. We decreased the structural coverage to the bare legal minimum, but we added a massive multi-million-dollar rider. It wasn't a homeowner's policy anymore. It was a fine arts policy, of the kind used for museums, covering the loss of unique, irreplaceable, handcrafted artistic works. I provided him with a portfolio I had been building for years. Original blueprints, detailed photographs, and sworn appraisals from respected artisans who recognized my work for what it was. The fire would not be an accident. It would be a liquidation event. I wasn't insuring a house. I was cashing out a masterpiece. On the seventh day, a cool, clear evening, I walked through the empty rooms one last time, a can of gasoline in each hand. I didn't feel sadness or anger. I felt a profound, cleansing stillness. I was a surgeon, preparing to excise a rot that had grown too deep. The fire was the lead story on the local news. Tragic blaze destroys historic home, elderly owner devastated but safe. Michael and Sarah, masters of media manipulation, gave tearful interviews, speaking of their poor, confused father with practiced solemnity. They installed me in a sterile beige motel room, patting my hand and assuring me they would handle everything from here. They were in control, or so they thought. The next morning, Mr. Davies launched his counteroffensive. He sent a single padded envelope via bonded courier to 12 carefully selected individuals: my sister Carol, Eleanor's brother David, our pastor, and a handful of old, influential family friends. Inside each envelope was a high-quality copy of the audio recording from my birthday party, and a simple, signed letter from me. It read, "This is why I am now homeless. I ask only for your understanding and your prayers. Please respect my privacy during this difficult time." The social detonation was immediate and spectacular. My sister Carol, the family's moral compass, was the first to call Sarah. I heard the story from David later. Carol didn't yell. She spoke in a low, trembling voice of shame and disappointment that was far more devastating than any tirade. David, a man of few words but deep integrity, left Michael a voicemail that simply said, "Eleanor would be ashamed of you. Don't call me again." The shunning was swift, silent, and absolute. Backed into a corner, their narrative of dutiful, grieving children shattered, Michael and Sarah did exactly what I had predicted. They went nuclear. They filed an emergency petition for conservatorship with the county court. Their filing painted a lurid picture of a dangerous, pyromaniac old man, a man whose mind had finally snapped. The court date was set for the following week. They arrived flanked by a lawyer who radiated smug confidence, ready to put their senile father out of his misery. Their lawyer laid it on thick. "Your Honor, Mr. Thorne is a beloved father, but his cognitive decline, accelerated by grief, has become a clear and present danger. In his confusion, he destroyed his own home, a repository of family memories. He requires professional care, and his children, despite their own profound loss, are here today to ensure he gets it." Michael testified about my forgetfulness. Sarah, weeping softly into a handkerchief, described finding me talking to Eleanor's empty armchair. It was a compelling performance. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, looked at me with an expression of deep pity. When it was our turn, Mr. Davies stood. He didn't call me to the stand. He simply approached the bench with a thin file folder. "Your Honor, before my client is subjected to any further character assassination, I would like to submit one document into evidence." He handed the file to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. I watched the judge's face as she read. Her expression shifted from pity to curiosity, then to sharp, undisguised astonishment. She looked up, her gaze piercing, peering over her glasses first at Michael and Sarah, then at me. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice now stripped of all pity and filled with a new, steely tone. "This is a full, comprehensive psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Alastair Finch, the head of geriatric psychology at University Hospital. It declares you to be of exceptionally sound mind, memory, and judgment." She paused, letting the weight of her next words fill the silent courtroom. And it is time-stamped for 9 o'clock in the morning on the day of your 75th birthday, the day before your children claim your mental decline became so acutely dangerous. A collective gasp went through the room. The color drained from Michael's face. Sarah's manufactured tears froze on her cheeks. They understood. This wasn't a desperate act. This was a strategy. I hadn't just reacted. I had anticipated. The judge's gavel struck the wood with a crack that echoed like a breaking bone. "Case dismissed," she declared, her gaze burning into my children. "With prejudice. And I would advise you both to think very carefully about your next steps." The insurance company's investigation was, as expected, rigorous. But it was no match for a court-validated psychiatric evaluation and the ironclad logic of Mr. Davies. My claim wasn't fraudulent. It was meticulously documented and legally sound. The fine arts policy was a work of genius. 3 months after the fire, the check was cut. It was for a sum that would have allowed Michael to buy his own developer. During that time, I lived not in a motel, but in the spare room of my old union friend, Frank. We spent our days in his workshop, the familiar scent of sawdust a balm to my soul. I was quiet, but I was not broken. I was waiting. When the funds cleared, I asked Mr. Davies to arrange one final meeting. We convened in his firm's panoramic conference room, a place of polished mahogany and silent, unassailable power. Michael and Sarah arrived looking like shipwrecks adrift on a hostile sea. Their expensive clothes were wrinkled, their faces haggard. They had been socially and professionally ruined. They came, I suspect, clinging to the last pathetic hope that their poor old dad might throw them a lifeline out of some lingering sense of familial duty. They sat opposite me, their eyes fixed on the gleaming surface of the table. "I asked you here today to discuss my inheritance," I began, my voice calm and even. "You were right about one thing, Michael. The house was a significant asset, a treasure, and I have now successfully liquidated it." A pathetic flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. Sarah sat up straighter, a drowning woman spotting a piece of driftwood. "The entire sum," I continued, savoring the weight of the words, "has been placed into a newly created charitable trust." I slid a professionally printed brochure across the table. On the cover was a photograph of Eleanor, taken 20 years ago, smiling in her sun-drenched garden. The title on the brochure read, "The Eleanor Foundation for Elder Care and Housing." I gave them a moment to read it, to let the full scope of my final move sink into their bones. The Foundation's mission is to build and subsidize high-quality, dignified housing for elderly individuals who have been abandoned, exploited, or discarded by their families. Mr. Davies here will serve as the trustee. I, myself, will be the first resident, living in a small, well-crafted cottage on the first property we acquire. There is nothing left for you to inherit. Ever. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum where their hopes had just been. It was broken only by Sarah's sharp, strangled gasp. They were staring at me now, truly seeing me for the first time. Not as a father, not as a dottery old man, but as the architect of their destiny, the man who had taken their own greed and forged it into a shield for others. Then, for the final, quiet act, I reached into my coat and placed the 2 small, carved cherry wood boxes on the table. The same boxes I had offered them in the smoke and ruin. I pushed them gently across the polished mahogany until they stopped in front of each of them. "This," I said, my voice soft but as final as a gravestone, "is your inheritance. The ashes from the hearth. It was the only part of the house you ever seemed to care about." I stood up, my back straight, my heart quiet. I turned away from their shattered faces and walked out of the conference room, leaving them with the literal and metaphorical dust of their avarice. The weight of the house, of their betrayal, of a grief that had almost consumed me, was finally gone. I was free, walking towards a new, smaller, but infinitely more meaningful life. A life built upon the ashes of the old one. What goes around comes around. If you believe in karma, deliver some good karma to this channel by hitting subscribe and liking the video. We appreciate your support, and we'll be back with more justice soon.